Okay, great. We're back. So this is the Melillo Method podcast, Everything Brain. And we're back for another episode. We've been having a lot of fun. We've been getting great feedback from what we're doing so far. And this is my co-host, Dr. Peter Scire, and partner in crime. And I'm Dr. Robert Melillo, and we're here for another episode. So we just finished 2024, and this is the first one of 2025. And so Peter was talking to me about, my rituals that I do towards the end of the year. I'm really big into setting goals, creating a plan, manifestation. But as you would expect, I look at it a little bit differently. I look at it from a neuroscience perspective. And so he thought it might be a really good way to start off and talk about that and talk about some of the neuroscience of things like goal setting, habit formation, motivation, and then how we've also utilized that in some of our families and helping them to be able to set goals and do things like that. So I think that's where we're going to start off.
Yeah, so I was thinking about all the things that we accomplished last year. I mean, we did the course. We wanted to start breaking ground on a paper, and we're working on that. We've talked about wanting to open up these multiple Melillo centers. So it just dawned on me, hey, why don't we talk about doing the podcast?
This was a goal that we set, literally, that we wrote down last year or in 2023 with the goal of doing it in 2024, and it happened.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we need to talk to people about how we make this stuff happen, because I think everybody looks and admires you and says, okay, how does this guy go, but it's not by chance. It's all these specific things that you've put into motion for so long. And, as long as I've known you, you've been consistently do it. You send me a text and you remind me like, hey, did you do your goals? Did you do your goals with your kids and stuff? So, yeah.
And I did it with my adult kids this year, each one of them. I did it with my wife this year. I have a workshop and that I put together a video that, actually, if you reach out, if you go on my website, it's, life plan goal setting. And it's literally my process. It's about a 3.5 hour process. But for me, it usually takes, a couple of weeks of really working with it. And I usually start right before Christmas. And I usually go for the week after Christmas and maybe early into the new year. I want to have most of my goals and everything in mind when the new year changes, because to me, that is a magical time. That's a time. And it's all about manifesting, and it's about really creating what you want. And so there is a process that I go through. But what I also like to relate to people is that, when we talk about, people think about in like woo-woo terms like the law of attraction and how does that work. Some other people have done a pretty good job of bringing it down to like some physics or quantum physics level, which, is okay. But what no one's really ever done is really brought neuroscience into personal development and goal setting. And that's what most people don't realize, that literally when you're talking about goal setting, the human brain is unique, and the prefrontal cortex is unique in that it is the most goal-directed brain, and that is the most goal-directed area of our brain. And that was one of the reasons why the prefrontal, and especially the left prefrontal cortex, was developed. In particular, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex was really for setting goals. And then making predictions around those goals and what we have to do to get those goals, and making sure that we're on track for those goals and monitoring that, and then being able to change, our plan and develop a plan. Also to have the belief that you could actually reach a goal, and also have the motivation to keep on trying, and even in the face of adversity. So these are literally different modules of our brain that were obviously very critical for early human survival. We wouldn't be here. We would have died a long time ago if we didn't have that type of behavior. And the reason why humans have progressed and Homo sapiens are here and Neanderthals aren't there is because that area of our brain developed so much and so advanced, and sometimes to the detriment maybe of other species. Like, okay, I have a goal, you get in my way, and I'm getting rid of you, right? So aggression is part of that. And we see that like in kids that have, let's say, really strong left brain, that they seem like they're searching for something and they have a goal. And and you tell them no and they freak out, or a kid gets in their way and they're going to be aggressive. They may bite or kick or whatever. And that is, part of that. So people don't realize that all of this stuff really comes down to your brain. And there are many people that I hear over the years that I can't do that. I can't set a goal. It just doesn't happen. And I can't stick with anything. And I always give up. And now I don't believe that I can get it. And I just can't motivate myself to do what I need to do. The second Friday in January is called Quitter's Day, because most people are making New Year's Eve resolution and they've already quit by the second Friday in January. But it really comes down to areas of their brain being underactive and underdeveloped, and they don't realize that if they could just change their brain, all of a sudden setting goals and sticking with goals would become much more easy.
So the goal planning that you have, did that start early on in your career? Was that something that you had early on when you entered chiropractic school, or was that something, obviously I know you were a good athlete in high school and I would imagine a good student, but was that something that was already there? And I know you had that relationship with your father,
Yeah.
and your father had that saying that he taught you and your brother. And what was that saying again?
Better than good?
Yeah, better
Or,
than good,
yes. Yeah, I think, there was a part of me from being an athlete and understanding work ethic and understanding that it took, effort to really become great at something, that it didn't just happen by chance. And you kind of get a vision in your mind of what you wanted to do. And I'd watch other people, like being a quarterback. I used to watch Joe Namath, and I'd watch him, and in my mind, I'd mimic like his movements and what he did, and I'd think about it, and I'd act like him, and then I'd go out and I'd practice it over and over and over and over. So that process of doing that, of having a vision or knowing what you want, seeing it really clearly, creating a goal, and then being able to adopt a certain level of motivation that's going to get you to do something repetitiously, to create a habit, which then becomes automated and then becomes part of what you do. And, any great athlete will tell you that for when your practice is about when you get on a field, that it has to be automated. You can't think about it. It has to be something that just happens.
Yeah.
And that only comes from repetition. So I learned that early on. But for sports, it was easy for me. But for academics, not so easy. And you don't always, as a kid, translate that cognitively to other things.
Yeah, because as you're saying that, I'm just sitting there thinking about how you're talking about mimicking and in your vision. So really relying more on that right hemisphere, and then coming over and then using the reinforcement and repeating it over and over and over, and now engaging in more the repetition of the left brain.
Right. So this, when you talk about the neuroscience on it, I believe that, we first get a lot of our goals in our right brain, because our right brain is survival. Our right brain is ultimately, that's the ultimate goal, right, is to survive, and anything that's going to do that. And we get this emotional significance of it, where we're emotionally driven by, we need this, we need to survive, we need people to love us, we need to be connected to people, we need to do things, we need to protect other people. And a lot of it revolves around there, but the right brain is subconscious and it doesn't have words. So it's a feeling we get, and we, maybe get an image or a picture in our brain of what we want, or we get this almost like intuitive subconscious, I know I'm getting an idea of what I want. And then the left brain picks it up, and the left brain says, okay, now let's be more specific. What do you really want? Let's verbalize it. Let's write it down.
Yeah.
Let's put numbers to it so it becomes measurable. And let's provide the motivation and the consistency and the familiarity to do the reps that it takes to get there.
Yeah.
And the belief and the confidence and the pride that you'll get from that, and the joy that you'll get from that. And so I think that that's kind of the way everything works. Everything comes into the right brain first. The left brain grabs a hold of it. The left brain, analyzes it. The left brain stores it and memorizes it and sequences it and categorizes it. The left brain then uses it as a tool and it sets a goal around that, and then it uses that information to get that goal and to create predictions on the best way to get to that goal. And then the right brain, again, grabs it and puts it into the context. Why do I want it? And I talk about, what's the purpose of the goal? Like, what is the bigger meaning of it? How does it fit into your life, or how does it fit into society, or how does it make a difference in the world? And the right brain and the left brain, so the left brain gets a goal, and the right brain then inhibits all of the other goals that would take us away of that goal. Because there's all these different things, I want to lose 20 pounds, but I also want to eat this chocolate cake. And so most people, what happens is the cake wins out. And then they're like, oh, I'm not going to, after a while they give up and they quit. And whereas the right brain is there to suppress all of those other goals that could take us away from this goal.
And in that context, you're really probably talking about the hyper-direct probably doing that, because if the direct pathway is bringing, like you said in multiple lectures over the years, like Dante's Inferno, everything wanting to come up.
Right.
And now you're needing this suppressive aspect. It could be that hyper-direct pathway that's doing that.
Yeah, and we know that when you're talking about the basal ganglia is involved in some of this part of goal setting and everything, because we know that when you look at the literature, and all of this, by the way, is defined in the neuroscience literature. Setting goals is known as self-regulation. You can look it up, Google it. It's out there, and it's all about setting goals and persisting to goals and pursuing goals. That's the science of self-regulation, motivation, belief systems, that you can actually achieve it. It's all there. And then forming habits is in the basal ganglia literature. We know that ultimately we take whatever we're doing in our brain, and when we do it enough or intensely enough, it becomes automated. It then comes out of our brain and goes into our basal ganglia, and that's where it lives. And then habits live in there. And we know that in the literature for like Tourette's or ADHD or OCD or addictive behaviors, in the scientific literature, it talks about all of those things as abnormal habit formation, meaning we're forming habits in the basal ganglia, but they're not beneficial habits. They're, making us, have tics, or they're making us say things that we don't want to say, or we're having obsessive thoughts over and over and over. And that's kind of what a habit is, right? Yeah. But we want to have some control. We have bad habits and good habits, and we want to have control over our habit formation when we form habits and when we activate those habits. And so there's all science around this. And, we know that this is where it exists. And the right brain, so we know that hyper-direct pathway is intimately involved with those basal ganglia and the direct and indirect pathway. But also it's always the seesaw type of thing. So the goals are set in the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So opposing goals must be in the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex at some point. And it probably does that in part with its connection with the hyperdirect pathway in the prefrontal area. So it's all of this, again, these different networks, these different balances, and that's, how the system works.
So back to my original question, when did you start actually doing the goal formating?
When I, really got into chiropractic school, and I started learning about neurology and neuroscience, and I started really feeling the impact of what we had the potential of doing, the weight of that you're taking people's health into your hand. And, literally you have a responsibility of that. And whatever I did, I wanted to be good at. Whatever I did, I wanted to be really good at it, one of the best at, if I could. And so I really started thinking about what is it going to take to do that. And I started applying what I did in sports. And I started going to a library, and I started reading papers that no one was reading yet. And I started, really educating myself and trying to learn it, and through repetition, and then trying to apply that to patients in clinic. And, that really kind of started me on that. And then when I graduated, I had the opportunity to see Tony Robbins early on. And he was the exact same age as me. And, so he was probably, when I saw him, I was probably around 26. He was around the same. And he had already made a name for himself on doing the firewalk. And, he wasn't that big yet, but like what he became. But he was starting out. And I saw him at this small little management conference, practice management conference they had gotten him. And it really impressed me. And I related to him because we were the same age. And, I related to what he was talking about. And he was really talking about really kind of applying a science of setting goals and doing things and really thinking about that. And that really resonated with me at the time. And I said, oh, okay. So I studied his work and I became really good at it. I did, all of his tapes. And then, a few years later, I came in and did my first firewalk here in the city. And then that started me on looking at other people in that realm. I started reading, any sort of personal development book I could. I started listening to tapes, and I would alternate that between tapes of neurology that I was listening to, and personal development. And I started taking bits and pieces like I would with other things, and started using them in my own life. And I was just starting my life out also, where I was, just getting married. I had already I was going through my diplomate in neurology. And so I, really wanted to focus that, and I really wanted to accomplish things. And I felt like this was the way to do it. So doing all of that, then I started formulating my own way that worked with me. That was a compilation of many different people to be able to come up with a plan and to set goals and to develop my plan for the year. And then I started taking that and modifying it to my business, to my practice and any other business. And, that was basically in early 90s, and done it ever since. And I've revolved it and refined it. And it's my process. And I tell people that it's not the only process. It may not even be the best process, but it's my process. And I would just keep it to myself, honestly, and my kids. But because that, people come up to me all the time and say, how do you accomplish so much? I don't feel like I have any time, and I want to do things, but I can't do it, and I'm so tired and overwhelmed, and so just I'd say to people, okay, I'll just tell you what I do, and this is how I do it, and it people really seem to resonate with it.
Yeah, because I think that was around about 2015 when you really started doing it. I remember when we were in Chicago. That was like the first time you ever took one of your modules and really decided, hey, let's expand on this. And you got into the neuroscience behind it.
Yes.
And I think that's when you started doing sending out the texts in the thread. And we had about 30 or 40 people on that original thread. And we're getting a daily challenge from you and everything. And it was the 30-day challenge, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is that ultimately, as we said, so you need a plan. And the way, I look at it is I try to keep it relatively simple. And it really is 3 questions. And Tony Robbins would talk about this. What do I want? Why do I want it? What do I need to get it? Yeah. So looking at creating a vision, which is a right brain way of basically saying, let me get an image of what I want. Let me get a feeling of what I want. And then what's the purpose of that? Like, why is that important? And what's the bigger picture? And it has to be a pretty powerful. It's not like, well, because, I want to really look cool when I drive down the road in a car. That's probably not a purpose that's going to drive you, as opposed to I want to change the world, or I want to set an example for my kids, or, I want to, be able to help this charity, whatever it may be. And then comes, okay, we're going to now set this as specific goals, and we're going to develop a plan around that. Because as I say all the time, and this is something that I also realized as I started developing my practice and a business, and I wanted to get a loan from a bank, the first thing they asked me for was a business plan. And I was like, a business plan? They're like, yeah, you need to plan this out. I was like, oh, okay. So I read up on business plans, and I worked with other people that helped create them, and we created a business plan. I was like, this is a pretty good thing to do. Like as I was doing the plan, I was actually seeing what my practice would look like. Not just now, but 5 years down the road.
Yeah.
And it had numbers to it. And I was like, whoa. And I looked at the numbers and I was like, these numbers I believe they're doable, which gave me this overwhelming confidence that I wasn't stepping into this unknown world of scary world of what's the future going to look like and am I going to make it? Am I going to be successful? It was like, no, I was like creating my future. And I remember that was like, whoa. And then I remember thinking, I don't have a plan for my life. And my life is more important than my business. So, and I realized that hardly anybody has a plan for their life. Like anybody starting a business has to have a business plan.
Yeah.
But most people have no plan for their life. They're just going through it. And so all of that came together. So I realized that a plan needed to be very specific. And if you set a goal of something like, I want to, be very happy this year. Okay, well, how do you measure that? How do I measure from my happiness level now versus next year?
Mm-hmm.
How do I create action steps around that? It's so I realized that to measure anything, you had to set goals. You had to be able to have numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't measure something, you can't manage it. You can't see if you're doing anything. So that's where you bring it into the left brain and you're like, okay, let me look at a specific sequence of steps and let me define this in terms of numbers. And, let me then break those numbers down and chop them down into little pieces and sequence them. And then that becomes really where a lot of the belief. And then from that, the action steps just become kind of obvious. Like, okay, yeah, well, if I want to do this, then I need to do this first. If I want to lose, 50 pounds, I have to go to the gym. Mm-hmm. And that means I may have to lose 60 pounds. I want to lose, maybe 5 pounds a month.
Sure.
That means like 1 pound a week.
Sure.
What am I going to do to lose 1 pound a week? Well, I probably need to go to the gym. And if I go to the gym, I'm going to need sneakers. I don't have sneakers. And maybe I can talk my friend into going with me so that they can go with me. So call them up. And maybe I should start looking at my diet. And maybe I need to look at a nutritionist. And that's another thing. You may not know all the steps, but you could say, let me get an expert who does know the steps. Let me hire an expert. I don't know what to do with my money and how to invest it, but I can hire an expert. I may not know what to do with my diet and how to lose weight. I know I want to lose weight, but I know I can hire an expert, and that's your action step. So the action steps just kind of come from that. And they become what you do, and this is what I do, what I do, what I do, what I do. But it really starts with that vision. It starts with specific. It starts with numbers. And that's to me, manifestation. That's how you literally manifest something.
So when you were developing this process, at any point did you find that it was difficult? Because you tend to have more of a right brain dominancy.
Yes.
So you're really talking about, these action steps and obviously dividing them in a very specific way and very detailed way. So was there at times where that might not have been the easiest thing for you to do because of the bias of your right brain?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It was a little bit hard to figure out how do I engage that left brain into that process. But I think the hardest part was really consistently looking at it and really being consistent. Mm-hmm. You can develop a plan and you can initiate that plan, but are you actually going to do it every day, every week?
Yeah.
And the way I broke down goals, initially were bigger goals and I had them for a year and then broke it down into monthly goals and then eventually weekly goals and then eventually daily goals. Mm-hmm. And that was a little hard, developing that level of consistency and repetition. And because at a certain point, it's a little bit boring to do that. And it's it takes a lot of detail type of work, which wasn't my natural skill. But because I was able to create such a powerful vision, and that's what I learned too, because in the beginning, whenever you're setting goals, most people are like, well, don't be unreasonable, right? Yeah. Don't set goals too big.
Yeah.
So start with these little goals. And little goals aren't very exciting, quite honestly, And I'd already accomplished a decent amount in my life. So, little goals aren't exciting. And if they're not exciting, they're not going to draw your focus. And this is the bottom line. The bottom line secret to really success in anything is it's all about focus. Whatever you focus on consistently is what shows up in your life. And I don't care if you look at it from the law of attraction, which I believe that there are, and we'll talk about, there's a creative force in the universe that you tap into. And we can get into that and really talk about it even in physics terms. Or you believe of the law of probabilities. One or the other, right? The more you look at something, the more you think about it, the more likely it is to happen, right? I think everybody could agree to that.
Yeah.
But, taking action steps towards it makes you think about it more and makes you more focused on it. So focus is really the key. And most people, they focus initially and mostly on what they're afraid of. The right brain is wired to look for danger. The right brain engages first. And the right brain is about survival. So if you do nothing, human nature is that you're going to wake up in the morning, your right brain comes on and goes, where's the danger coming from today? What do I have to worry about today? And now I'm looking for that. And my focus is there. And so what happens? I draw that to me. The probability of that happening goes up with me thinking about it and looking at it. So I need to disengage that automatic processes that happen subconsciously. And you have to engage it with the left brain. You have to set a goal. You have to have a goal that when you wake up, and I use the example, when you're Christmas or birthdays and you wrote a list of what you want, so you have a clear vision of what you want, and you wrote it down, and you believe you're going to get it. Like you believe it. This is coming to me tomorrow. And you go to bed at night and you're like, I can't sleep. I'm so excited about what tomorrow is going to bring because I know when I wake up and I can't wait 8 hours. And then you wake up and the first thing you think about is those presents and you run down the stairs and you can't wait for it. And that's because you had this goal and the left brain is there. And these are so exciting that you can't think of what you're afraid of. When you were a little kid, you weren't like, oh, I'm going to be afraid of, what did my teeth do? I have a test today or homework. You couldn't even think about that. You only could think about these goals. So it has to be something pretty exciting to really engage that left brain. And you have to engage it and you have to have something and you have to have a clear picture of what you want. It can't be vague. It can't be like, I got a feeling of what I want. It has to be really clear and in focus. And it has to be really exciting so that when you wake up, you think about that. And you don't think about that because most people are focused on what they're afraid of, and that's what they want. You have to stop that. You have to consciously stop it. And the only way you can do it is by engaging your conscious left brain and setting goals. And I say to people that, the idea of manifestation for some people, it sounds, kind of woo-woo or, wishful thinking or mystic. And there's some parts of that to that because, there's parts of the way the universe works that we don't fully understand. But people think like they have a choice. Well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to set goals this year. Or, I'm not going to do that because I used to do that and it never worked out. And so I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to play that game. Okay. You're doing it. You don't understand that you are manifesting one way or the other. You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Your choice is, do you control the outcome or is it what you don't want to happen in your life? Because one way or the other, you are going to manifest because you are going to think and you are going to, and you already are, so the idea that, well, I don't want to do that. I don't believe in it. It doesn't matter whether you believe in it or not. Guess what? Universe doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. You are manifesting in your life because you control everything you do. And most people don't understand that simple concept. They think that everything around them happens to them. Yeah. And they're a byproduct of their environment and their upbringing. And that's true to a certain degree. It sets some of the tone early on in life with brain development and everything. But the fact is, once you're a full-grown adult, you have the choice of making your life anything you want it to be. And it is your choice. And in fact, not only do you have a choice, it is whatever you think it's going to be. And you literally create your life. If you have a miserable life, you created it in your thoughts. And most of those thoughts may have not been something you wanted to think or that you intentionally thought of, and they were actually fears that you had all the time. And you don't realize that by thinking of those fears, you literally manifested it. And then you go, see, I knew that was going to happen. And I have no control because I didn't want that to happen. And I specifically thought I didn't want it to happen. And I thought, don't let it happen. Don't. And I prayed, God, don't let this happen.
Yeah.
And it happened. And they don't realize that you made it happen by thinking about it and praying for it not to happen. And by thinking about all the things you're afraid of, you literally brought it into place. And when you say that, you go, oh, that actually kind of makes sense. But for most people, they don't think of it at that level. So again, for people out there, if you're thinking, well, I don't believe in this manifestation stuff and I don't want to do that, you are. All your choices. Do you want to control what you manifest and make sure that it's good and bring great things into your life? Or do you want to think about constantly what you worry about and bring all that into your life? That's your choice.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it firsthand with my explosion of my interest in neuroimmunology and how much that's changed over the last 5 years because I've done one thing consistently for 5 years. Is every Tuesday night be part of a group think tank on neuroimmunology.
So what's the one word that drove that? What's the one word that we just already talked about that drove all of that?
Consistency.
Focus.
Focus, yeah.
Right? So Bill Gates, I believe this story is true. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett years ago when they were the two richest men in the world. Supposedly were invited to Bill Gates' uncle backyard barbecue party. And so they were in the backyard, and Bill Gates' uncle says, hey, you two richest guys in the world, you must have some secrets of what you did and how you did it. And, I think we'd all like to hear that. So he gave them a paper and a pencil, and he said, all right, what I want you to do is both of you write down what's the secret to your success. And so they did. They both wrote it down, piece of paper, and they gave it to him. And he looked at it and he said, you both wrote one word, and you both wrote exactly the same word. And they didn't know what each other wrote. And that one word was focus. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And so controlling your focus controls your destiny. The question is, how do you control your focus? Mm-hmm. Some people can just do it. If something is really exciting or you want something so bad, so that almost everybody in their life at some point has done that. Everybody at some point has manifested something that they wanted. Mm-hmm. By really focusing so bad, I want that so bad, and they were able to do it. But it may only be for that one instance, or it may only be, when times are really bad, or, it almost be for that one test. But they don't know how they do it. So it's really about that. It's about creating a system. And there's so many different ways of doing that. And, you can develop your own way that works for you. And that's what I did. I just said, okay, over the years, what worked for me, what didn't work for me, and how did it get to the point where I could just control my focus and I could direct it all the time and make it show up automatically. And that was what I was looking for in the process of that. And I knew that ultimately that was engaging my brain and engaging my left brain and my right brain and working it together and then ultimately, getting it to go down into my basal ganglia and become automated through repetition. And then I knew it would be automatically drawn to it. I would automatically be there. And I knew it was going to happen. And I never had any doubt. And in the beginning, of course, when you're doing anything, you have a doubt. But at a certain point, and I tell people, like I look at people like, incredibly talented people that are young, but still, they're big right brain dominant and struggle with self-esteem or imposter syndrome, or whether they really believe they're worthy or whether they can do it. At a certain point, you have to just trust yourself. Mm-hmm. When you were a young kid or when you were in college and you had a paper to do and you were like, shit, I don't know if I'm going to do this paper. I don't know if I'm going to get this done on time. And you were like, I don't think I'm going to do it. I don't think I'm going to do it. Or then I worry about it. And then, maybe you leave it to the last minute, but you stay up all night, you pull an all-nighter and you get it done. Yeah. And then the next paper comes along and you're like, shit, I don't think I'm going to do it. I don't know. At a certain point, you realize I always get it done. Yeah. And I always do it pretty well.
Yeah, you get the reinforcement of the good grade. Yeah.
Yeah, at a certain point, you just go,
Yeah.
I know I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to think about it all the time. I'm going to put it aside and say, there's going to be a time of this. And then I'm going to literally make a time for it. I'm going to write it down in my future. And I'm going to say, at this point, I need to really engage this because this is due. You know, I have a book that's due and it's due here. This is my deadline. I know I need this amount of time to do the book. So at this point, I better now focus on it. But right now, I have a couple months and I have other things coming up to this. I have some lectures I have to do. And that's what I need to focus on now. You know, so you get to a point, and rather than being there and saying that I'm going to think about all that, I'm going to worry about this lecture I have coming up, and I'm worried about my practice, and I'm worried about this patient, and then I'm worried about this book that I got to get, 8 months down the road, this deadline for it. And you carry all that around, and it's so unproductive. And all you're doing is thinking about that, I don't know if I'm going to do it all. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can get it done. It becomes overwhelming. Then you're like, and then you self-sabotage or whatever. So at a certain point, you just got to know, I know I'm going to get done. And I put it down and I have a plan and it's set aside and I've written it down and I know it's going to happen. But it doesn't have to happen now. Mm-hmm. And I may not even know how it's going to happen. It doesn't matter. I know it will happen. And I know that when I have a clear vision of it and I have a plan and I have it literally written down on my calendar, I've literally manifested that in the future. That will happen in the future because it's there. And it started with a thought in my head. That was nothing. But that thought became something because it's a collection of electrical firing in the brain and atoms and subatomic particles that I'm bringing together. And, it's a beam of energy and it's a particle and a beam. Mm-hmm. And then that thought, I write it down and now I've actually put it in reality. This is now something tangible. It's real. I can see it. I can feel it. And now I put it into a specific date on my calendar. And now it's actually happening. And it's actually happened in the future. And that's what I look as manifesting.
And several years ago, when you wrote the Reconnected Kids book, we talked about in prior modules where you set up the whole staging of development. But the second part of the book was where you really outlined your GPA that you just went over, the goal, purpose, and action.
Yes.
And this is something that I think that when we were working with our families for many years, it was really important for them to institute into, because again, most of our families that are working with a kid with special needs, it's just everything's just wide open. There's generally no behavioral rules in the home. There's no behavioral consequences whatsoever. And then, obviously any children that have learning differences, they're just in that survival mode of like how did Johnny have a bad day in school today? They're not thinking about setting up a scenario where how they can actually become successful in the classroom.
Right. Like I often say again, it really starts with focus, but that starts with what am I focused on? What do I want? And I've told you this. I do this at parties. My wife always, busts my chops about it because I'll do things and people will start to gather around me. And, if you're at a party, for instance, try it. Try this at home. Just listen to people. I like to listen to people. And most people spend most of their time bitching about something, right? They're usually talking about, their health is miserable or this, or they went to this doctor and they were sick, or they talk about their job and what they don't like about their job, and this person I work with, and she's such a pain in the neck, and whatever, and my boss, I hate him, I can't stand him, right? Or their relationship, my boyfriend is doing this, my husband is doing this, my wife is doing this. And if you listen to most people's conversation, and it's like, okay, that's what they're saying. So every once in a while, if I'm in the midst of a conversation with somebody, and let's say they're saying something about their job and what they don't like, and they're talking about their boss or whatever, I'll just stop in the middle and go, what do you want? And they'll be like, what? What do you want? You're telling me about your job and it sounds pretty bad and you're really unhappy. Yeah. And your boss is miserable. Yes. Okay. So what do you want? Do you want a new job? What job would you want? Do you want to change careers? And they look at me like no one's ever asked that question. Like most people just listen and go, yeah. same old stuff. I'm doing the same thing. And now I'm going to bitch and moan about my life to you. And we're going to commiserate about how miserable we are. No one ever says to you, what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's in your control, because they're thinking like this is all out of my control.
Yeah.
And they're complaining about it. Like it's somebody else's fault. They're blaming other people. And that's what we do. We make ourselves a victim. We become a victim because we're not in control. So we look for somebody to blame. And this is our whole world right now, right? Who can I cancel? Who can I blame for my life? And they look at me and they usually go, I don't know what I want. And then they'll say, but I'll tell you what I don't want. And then they just go through a whole litany of things that they don't want, which sounds almost exactly like what they were just bitching about. And then I'll say, that sounds like your complaints. It sounds like the job you have. It sounds like the boss you have now. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, so you know you don't want that. So they're really clear about what they don't want. So what are they thinking about? Where's their focus? Their focus is clearly on what they don't want. And they're drawing it into their life. And they've created that reality, and they have no idea. They're blaming other people when really they are to blame. And unless you realize that, you're never going to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. So I usually say to them, okay, your problem is you don't know what you want. It's not this. It's you don't know what you want. You need to figure that out. And then they may go, you know what? I do know what I want. I do know that my dream. I say to them, what's your dream job?
Yeah.
And they'll go, and they'll say like, I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah.
They have it. Our brains are built to dream. I mean, our brains are wired to set goals, but we suppress it because we believe that we don't have control. And the way to take control is to literally take control, is to write a plan, and it starts with, what do you want?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because when you get into working with these families, many times they don't know what they want for their kids. They're saddled with the diagnosis and whatever that diagnosis is, and they see all the symptoms and they see all the disarray that comes with that. And then they're overwhelmed with all these different treatment options, and they don't know who to believe and everything. And I think where we can step in and say, okay, number one, we with authority know what the problem is, but then more specifically, what do you want? Because because that'll help us guide us. For us as a clinician working with them, to guide them into saying, here's what we think we're going to get at this point. You may want this, and especially when we're working with the families that of the non-speaking community. Okay, well, we have to arrive here first before we get ultimately to that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing that, again, I think for many of our families, it might be just simply, hey, I want to have my child be able to sleep through the night, okay? Or I want my child to, at 7 years old, no longer be in diapers, okay? And so I think being able to create that clear, and I think that's one of the other beauties of your work over the years that I've become to like just constantly think about is like, we always have a goal for every stinking therapy that we're doing at that moment. Yes. That we're going to measurable goal. We're going to measure and look for the capacity of that function. And whether it's at 10% capacity or 60% capacity, whatever that is. But then here's where we're going.
Right.
And then when we arrive at that goal, we're going to re-measure it and then say, okay, what's the new goal?
Right.
Okay. And I think that's where, when we look at this from everybody else, everybody's not measuring goals.
No.
They're just hoping that whatever they do that day kind of mitigates a symptom in some capacity.
Yeah,
but it's not symptoms. But it's not goal driven to increase the functional capabilities of that child.
That was the whole reason why functional medicine and functional neurology started. The difference was being able to actually measure functions and start to have some actual goals.
Yeah.
But in the family, the reason why I wrote in Reconnected Kids and I brought this plan to them was because, as you know, these families were just kind of chaotic. And so if you ask them, what do you want? The most common answer I would get from parents would be, I want peace in my family. I want my wife and I to be happy with each other. And what I would often find as well is if I said to the father, what do you want for your kids? What would you want? What would your ideal life be? And what would you want for your child? And then I'd ask the mom, and they'd be completely different.
Yeah.
And they never actually communicated. And most people never communicate. Many people that are married don't clearly communicate. Oh, she knows my goal. She knows what I want for my kids. And I know, we know. Yeah? Okay. And then I take them in separate rooms and say, by the way, you have opposite. Your wife would love to see your son be like a spiritual, free spirit, artistic, creative, because she believes that that's what he's like, and that she wants him to have a lot of friends and be really, happy and, just not be stressed out. Dad, you want him to be a college athlete, full scholarship, play in the NFL. You want him to be training every day. You want him to be so goal-directed and, and really be focused on school and education. You have completely different goals for your kids. You have a completely different vision of how you want your kids to work out. And so what kind of message do you think you're giving to your kids? And I told them from the very beginning that one of the ways to eliminate 50% of bad behavior and negativity in your family is just both of you be on the same page. And so, again, imagine if we can teach kids at a young age to be able to say, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? What do you want? And that you're in control of it. We don't ever teach our kids that. And again, emphasizing to the parents that whatever you are is what your kids are going to be. So do you have goals? Do you know what you want? Do you know what you want in your family? Do you know what you want in your marriage? Do you know what you want in your health? Do you know, what you want in your behavior and your work ethic? If you don't know, if you don't have goals, you think your kid's just automatically going to get that?
Sure.
No. So we need to sit down as a family. The mom and dad need to sit down and say, what are the values that really we want to instill in our kids? Who are we as a family? And literally write it down and then reiterate it to your kids. Show them this, right? Yeah. And then talk about, setting some rules up. We need a plan. Like, what's the rules? How does it operate? Yeah. And then, what are our goals? And even talking to our kids about, what do you want? Because the biggest thing that we find is that if we try to get families and we're like, okay, we want to do this and we want to, get your child to do their homework or to do these exercises or to stick to this diet or not eat gluten. And the kid just feels like, my mom and dad are making me do this and I hate it and I don't want to do it. Okay, well, what about if we turn it around and say, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want in life? I want to get good grades? Okay, I want my parents to be proud of me. Every kid's going to say those things. I want that. I want good grades. I want my parents to be happy. I want to have a lot of friends. I want to be maybe good at sports, or I want to be good at drawing. I don't want to be, overweight and unhealthy. I don't want to be sick. I don't want to have allergies all the time. Okay, this is what you want. Yeah. So then maybe you want to do these exercises, or maybe you don't want to do this diet. But you have to do that in a process. You have to literally talk to them about, what do you want? Why do you want it? What do we have to do to get it? They need to be able to believe that they're doing this for them and for their reasons, and they're choosing this. Yeah. It's not something you're just imposing on them. Yeah. And that's the shift that we're trying to get in that book. That's the shift that we're trying to do. And it's not easy to do. Yeah. And the longer you wait to do it, the harder it is. Yeah. And again, I know from self-experience that I remember with my daughter, Ellis, when she was really young, the story about how she, at one point, when we went to see a concert and she was so moved by it and she said, Daddy, that's what I want to do. I want to be a singer. I want to do that more than anything. And if you'll help me, I'll do whatever you say and whatever. So I was like, okay. She just asked me to help her. That's my job as a parent. And okay. So I remember one day we sat on my bed and we were just sitting there, dad and daughter, and just kind of snuggling up. And I sneakily brought a book with me, a little, notebook and a pen. And I was talking to her and I said, hey, what do you want? Like, what do you want? What do you want your life to look like? What do you want? And she looked at me. And I remember she looked up like that. And I said, what? She said, I can tell you anything? I said, yeah, you can tell me anything. And she said, really? It's anything I want? I was like, yes. And so the power of a child to dream is there. It's innately there.
Yeah.
You almost can't stop it, but we do stop it.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, do I not let her think she can dream like that? Do I not reinforce that? Because I thought I'm doing this. But you don't, because as a parent, you're like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. What do? The first thing we do, we wake up and we tell them, they're leaving the door. Don't get in trouble today. Don't talk to that. Don't fight. We're like, don't do this. What are we doing? We're drawing them to what they don't want, what we don't want with them. And they're thinking already about what I want, what I'm happy, and we're drawing them back. No, don't do this. Don't do that. And so she looked at me like that, and I went, wow, okay. I was like, yeah. And I remember it was just like a flood came out of her. It was like you couldn't stop her. Like all these dreams were in there. And I finally gave permission to come out, and she started just flowing. I want to be a singer. I want to do this. I want to be on the stage. I want to be like, what I saw. And I was just like, wow. And then so I said, let's write some of this down. And I just started writing it down, like as she was dictating it. And she just went on, and she was only 6 years old. And then I just said, why do you want that? Like, why is that? And she thought about it, and I, nudged her a little bit, and she was like, well, it'll make people happy, and it'll make you and Mom proud of me. And, we went through that for a while, and then I was like, well, what do you think you got to do to really be a great singer and to do that? And she was like, well, I probably need to sing and learn how to sing better. Yeah, maybe get lessons, yeah. I need to learn music. Maybe I should take some lessons. Maybe I should. I guess to be a singer, I need to have strong and be in good health, and like she was like talking about exercising and playing soccer and everything like that. So we went through this, and we literally wrote this plan out. And I've lost it now, but I found it a few years ago, and I realized that was her whole life. She did it. She went to college. She got a music degree. She's been singing. She's been doing that. She went into New York City. She pursued it. And now she's in Nashville, and she's, an up-and-coming top singer-songwriter. And it all started with that plan. And so I started saying to parents, I want you to do that with your kids. You can do it.
Sure.
I've seen it. I've done it. And that was where that started in that book, that we could start with taking control, and everybody, but you need to be the example. You need to do this. And then you need to teach your kids how to do this. And if you start them thinking on you are in control of your life, even at a 5-year-old or 6-year-old level, it's unbelievably powerful.
Yeah.
And, again, that's what we talk about. There are some people, when they have such severe imbalances in their brain, if you have really severe left brain deficits and you're in a depressed state, you literally can't set a goal. Like no matter what. And Tony Robbins, the difference is Tony Robbins will say, just change your state. Like just change it. Just change your emotional state. And, majority of people can probably do that. But if you're in a brain imbalance and you have certain emotions that are being generated without your choice and you don't have a control, you literally can't do that. And those are the people that go, I can't do that. I can't visualize. I can't see it. I can't set a goal. I've tried. I can't stick with it. And they don't realize that we got to change it. And the cool thing from the neuroimmune part is we know that inflammation and sickness behavior literally targets your ability to set goals and your motivation. And so those inflammatory cytokines like IL-6 literally shut down your ability to set goals. Yeah. So if you're physically overweight or unhealthy or you have inflammation in your body, you literally can't set a goal. Yeah. You can't pursue it. It won't work because it's actually throwing your brain off. And no matter what you do, no matter how many modules and no matter how many seminars you do, it's just not going to happen.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation today. I mean, this is like really laying down some great stuff. And I think that for our families out there and our listeners, that if you haven't went out and got the Reconnected Kids after we did a Reconnected Kids show a couple months ago, I think this brings it back to the second part of the book, really for them to go in there and be able to institute this GPA program that you've developed for yourself and your own family. And we've shown thousands of families over the years through our centers on how to do this. And so it was really great to hear this explanation in a more thorough way today.
Yeah, and this is, if you go to my office, if you speak to my staff, this is how I run my everyday life, everyday business. We have literally yearly, monthly, weekly, daily goals in all different areas, and there's a way of doing it. So if you're interested in learning more, again, because people have asked me throughout the years, I created a video. And if you go to my website, drrobertmelillo.com, and you look under life plan and goal setting, it's a 3.5 hour module that you go step by step. You follow it, and the thing about it is that like when I started engaging it in class, I would teach people the principles, and then they'd go back and they wouldn't do it. And so I started saying, okay, you're literally going to write in class right now. Like I'm going to make you do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you leave, you're leaving with a plan. And it's almost like you have no choice in the matter.
Yeah.
And that's how I created the video. So it's not like I'm teaching you these principles. I'm literally leading you through it and making you do it. So if you watch the video and you write when I tell you to write and you do what I tell you to do, at the end of this 3 hours, you will have a literal plan in your life for the next year that will probably be the most organized, powerful plan that you've ever put together. And that's just the beginning, because as we talked about, you get better the more you do it, the more you experience it. You're not going to be great right from the very beginning. And that's also an understanding thing that you have to understand, be willing to fail. And stick with it and not give up and not blame somebody else, but realize that it's all you. So if you want to find that, you can go to my website and you can get access to that video and use it. And I'd love to hear feedback on it if you feel that it's helpful for you. And I just had a very big celebrity who I've known and friends with, and he called me up and he said, "Hey, can you send that workshop thing for me, because I did that last year and I thought it was great and I want to do it with my daughters."
Mm-hmm.
And so I sent it to him. And so again, he's somebody who's obviously one of the most successful people in the entertainment business, but yet again, being able to set a goal and do it this way, he understands the value of it. So it's out there if you want it. So thank you. This is cool. I like bringing this stuff. I love talking about this stuff, and it was fun.
All righty. We will see you next episode.
All right. See you next time. Bye.